And share something with you the Lord showed me through the account of the death of Jezebel and what it says about our dealing with the Jezebel spirit in the church today. Jezebel was a wicked queen in the Old Testament. She, along with her husband Ahab, set up worship for Baal in Israel. They had the true prophets of God slaughtered. She was evil through and through. You see that throughout her entire story. She was known to set people up, to set up false witnesses, to lie so that she could get what she wanted. The Jezebel spirit is active not only in the Old Testament, it's also seen in the New Testament. We know that specifically because the spirit is referenced in the book of Revelation, but we see it rampant in our churches today. The Jezebel spirit is marked by a few things, but the most important thing to know is that Jezebel has an insatiable desire for control. She is unsubmitted. She will not submit to authority. She will not be told what to do. She thinks rules don't apply to her. She can run the church however she wants, and she particularly hates men and women of God, especially those with prophetic giftings. And we see her at work all over the place. Oftentimes what we see is that Jezebel is allowed to rule in a church simply because she's created an environment where people are afraid to confront that spirit. And I say her, but we know this spirit can be in a man or a woman. But quite simply, people are afraid because they have seen her outbursts, they've seen her tirades, and they don't want to be bothered with her. And a lot of times what will happen is a Jezebel will be so steeped for so long in a church, and she gets away with it because simply people have seen the way that she is, and they're afraid. They're afraid what the fallout will be, so they say it's better to just let her be than to confront her. Well, the problem with that is in Revelation, when Jezebel is mentioned, the charge laid against the church was that they had tolerated Jezebel. Not necessarily endorsed her, but just tolerated her. And we see that in churches today, and I think a lot of times they're tolerating because they're afraid of the fallout if they confront her. Well, this week I was praying about the Jezebel spirit in particular, and the Lord reminded me of her death. It is recorded in 2 Kings. Now, a lot of people get mixed up, and they always equate Jezebel with Elijah, and sometimes they think Elijah is the one that caused her death, but that's just not the case. 2 Kings 9 tells us that Jehu was anointed king of Israel. During his anointing, there was a specific responsibility that was placed on him. I'm going to read this to you, starting in verse 7. You shall strike down the house of Ahab your master, that I may avenge the blood of my servants the prophets, and the blood of all the servants of the Lord at the hand of Jezebel. For the whole house of Ahab shall perish, and I will cut off from Ahab all the males in Israel, both bond and free. Then we go down to verse 10. The dog shall eat Jezebel on the plot of ground at Jezreel, and there shall be none to bury her. So part of Jehu's anointing as king, the anointing was on him to kill Jezebel, to be a part of bringing down that house of Ahab that had ordained demonic worship in the land of Israel. We see those prophecies fulfilled at the end of that same chapter when Jezebel dies. So let's see how Jezebel dies. We see that Jehu rides up to where she is. Verse 30 of 2 Kings 9 says, Now when Jehu came to Jezreel, Jezebel heard of it. She put paint on her eyes and adorned her head and looked through a window. And then, as Jehu entered the city gate, she asked, Is it peace, Zimri, murderer of your master? Zimri was a known rebel. And she's trying to equate him with that. Side note, the Jezebel spirit likes to accuse everybody else of being what she actually is. And that's what happened here, because Jezebel was rebellious. Jezebel was unhusbanded. Jezebel would not be told what to do. She had to be in absolute control. The Jezebel spirit does that today. Verse 32, Jehu looked up at the window and said, Who is on my side? Who? So 2 or 3 eunuchs looked out at him, and he said, Throw her down. So they threw her down. And some of her blood spattered on the wall and on the horses, and he trampled her underfoot. And when he had gone in, he ate and drank, and then he said, Go now, see to this accursed woman, and bury her, for she was a king's daughter. So they went to bury her, but they found no more of her than her skull and the feet and palms of her hands. Therefore they came back and told him, and he said, "This is the word of the Lord, which he spoke by his servant Elijah the Tishbite, saying, on the plot of ground at Jezreel, dogs shall eat the flesh of Jezebel." The eunuchs, the ones who were there to serve her, whom she had probably treated very poorly, when given the opportunity, they push her out of that window, and she falls to her death, and blood splatters everywhere. It's very descriptive to say the blood was on the wall, the blood was on the ground. That's a big mess. That's a very ugly, hard to think about mess. But Jehu, the one anointed to be there to cause her demise, essentially, although she caused it herself, he doesn't stay to clean up the mess. He goes inside, he eats and drinks, seemingly pretty unbothered. And then it's almost like an afterthought. Oh yeah, somebody needs to go make sure she's buried properly because she is the daughter of a king. Now, when they go back out, the dogs have cleaned up the mess. The dogs ate the body. The dogs licked, I think, everything clean. The Lord reminded me of this scene this week. And he spoke a word to me that I think is not just for me, but for anybody who finds himself contending with this controlling Jezebel spirit in their life. This was the word of the Lord. When Jezebel falls, it will be messy, but you don't have to clean it up. Anytime a controlling spirit is dealt with, it will be messy, because that spirit's not going to give up easily. But if you are anointed and you know your place in the story, Elijah was there to call out what was happening, but it was not on Elijah to kill her. It was on Jehu to be the one who started those dominoes falling. Jehu knew what his role was in it. He fulfilled his role, and he was able to move on. He fulfilled his role, and then he did the next thing, which was go have himself a snack. And he was able to do it without much thought of what had just happened back there. He was not fixated on how do we get her corpse out of this road, how do we clean up the blood that's everywhere. Instead, he went on about his business. And I say to you, man and woman of God, if you know your place, if you know your anointing in dealing with a demonic spirit, whether it is Jezebel, whether it is Absalom, whether it is any other sort of spirit that a false prophet, whatever it is that's coming against you, know your place, do what God called you to do, and trust that he will handle it, even if it's messy on the other side. Don't sit anymore in fear and say, I can't confront this, I can't do anything about this because I can't confront this sin because will be your demise. That because is saying you're not trusting in God that he can clean it up on the other side and that your success will continue. So I say to you, be bold and be courageous. Know your anointing, know your part, walk in that, and trust God.